expecting, but I will call the special board meeting of Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District to order. Our one item of business today is the Watershed Management Plan update, and our purpose here is to go through the draft comments, I assume. But I'll let Emily take it over.
Okay, yeah, thanks, John. So we had sent out the comments that we received, and we've got them all posted on the website and everything. And for the most part, I had mentioned this earlier, nothing too major. I think there's just a handful of things I'd recommend we go over today. And I'll recommend we go over these first and then open it up if there was anything else for managers.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'll also note that Megan and I met with Dan Fabian last week and we clarified some of the comments we had questions on. You might have noticed some of them were in red on the comment response matrix.
Right.
And some of them, I don't even think we need to go over. It was just, we figured it out and we're on the same page now. And then some of them are a bit more substantial, like when they talk about changes to goals or metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So Megan's going to join us as well. I'll keep an eye and let her into the meeting, but I think we can just get started for now since the managers are here. So kind of the first comment that I wanted to go over was from Dan Fabian, and he'd been looking at how the goals were written and then how the metrics were written. And he wanted kind of a more direct tie between the two. For example, he had cited education and outreach as being one of the ones, and he was asking why aren't the metrics more closely related to the goals? And so what me and Megan tried to explain to Dan in the meeting was, so our goal is kind of similar to the last plan, increase public knowledge of and appreciation for human impacts to water resources, and increase target behaviors that positively impact. And so how do we measure if we've increased public knowledge? How do we measure if we've increased these behaviors? And then that's when you look at the metrics. And we said here that we, as part of this plan, we still need to establish baselines. The first example is that yard waste disposal in wetlands. That's come up recently, and we're getting kind of some mapping efforts together and just already starting that work on establishing those baselines. But yeah, getting kind of a count of what's the frequency that we're seeing it. And then kind of the goal is just reduce it from that point. And so we explained that to Dan, and he kind of saw the connection between the metrics and the goals a little bit more. And maybe one of the changes that I recommended was, okay, maybe I can just say in the goal language that we're going to establish the baselines. But other than that, I think, and he said too, I picked out the ones that had to do with goals and metrics as his most significant comments. But he even said none of the comments are make or break. This won't keep us, in his opinion, from getting the plan approved. So it's really, I wanted to kind of explain that discussion with Dan, and then just leave it up to the board of, do you agree with what if we added to the goal language, we will establish baselines against which to measure metrics? Do you like it written as is, or do you have other ideas for kind of tying that together for people a bit better?
My guess would be the simpler the goals, the better, and then let the narrative describe how we're going to accomplish those goals, which I think you've done in the metrics section. So, you could argue or disagree with the behavior change outcomes we've chosen to go after, but we've chosen some, and they're specific to the kind of things we're seeing in the district. So I don't know. I think it's okay the way it is, but Dan may not have agreed completely with that, but that's my view.
Well, I think it's difficult to take the language that's there and understand, if you're looking from the outside, and understand how exactly you're going to see if there's any impact. And the only thing that I thought of is that some of these things lend themselves to a picture timeline kind of a thing. So if you can go out there before we start these processes and take pictures of the wetlands that have dumping sites, and then they've got a baseline photographic record. And then the next step would be putting up the signs like we've done on Hayward. It looks like those signs have gone up already. So take pictures of the signs. So you're showing this video or this photographic record of progress. And then, every year you just take a picture at that site and you measure the reduction. I don't know how else to do that except through that type of a record. It's like monitoring shorelines.
Mhm.
That's why our 5-year process is so important, which, by the way, we're a couple of years late on Comfort Lakes, but the update, but that is such an important record to show what's happening on all of our shorelines if we're not careful about our ordinances and making sure that we're educating people and so on. So that would be my only recommendation, is that we've got the language in there to establish these things. And then the secondary, I wouldn't change this, but I would have an addendum that we can add as we do the process for how we're going to monitor these things. Now, I don't think that has to be an addendum to the plan. I think that can just be an operating, addendum.
And maybe the progress report would have and that's what the progress report would do, is look at these
Absolutely.
metrics.
Yeah.
Yep, perfect, yep.
Okay.
And the only thought I have would be that if you're going to establish a baseline, if you know what the baseline is going to be, maybe mention that for that particular objective. Like we're going to use chloride measurements as a baseline, or we're going to take photographs of the shoreline as our baseline, just to make it a little bit more specific, just rather than saying we're going to establish a baseline. Make it as specific as possible to the thing you're trying to measure. So then all you're really missing is the number, and not what the baseline is going to be.
Which is different than what John and I have just said, is that leave this language in the plan vague, because you might change the processes along the way. And so you don't want to get locked into a particular behavior if you find that doesn't work, or you come up with a better plan. That's the only way, that's the only reason I like it as the, not an official amendment, but as an addendum. It's an operating addendum to accomplish these goals. And like Emily just said, you're measuring that every year and reporting on it in the annual report, effectiveness report. So
I hear your concern. You might be able to get around that by saying, for example, in brackets, for example.
Yeah.
Then they have an idea that you're going to be specific about it.
And I don't mind that, because it doesn't lock you down to that particular
Right, exactly.
process. Yeah.
But it helps to inform the reader
Right.
of some
Right.
ideas.
What we had in mind. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that seems like a good compromise. And again, it's not make or break, but I think that shows that, we'll expand on it and give some more detail.
I
Yeah.
think that's what the bureaucrats are looking for, though, is, well, how are you going to do this? So.
Right.
Mhm. And we talked about with Dan too of, there's obviously this big push for, is it prioritized, targeted, and measurable? And he even said, when it comes to your actual resource goals and your whole
Mhm.
PTM process, it's very good. And so getting into kind of these programmatic ones, it's a little bit harder to have some concrete thing. And so he understands that and knows that our process for the resource goals are good.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Well, that sounds good. I'll kind of make those type of changes. For example, here's how we'll establish these baselines, but otherwise not really touch the goals themselves.
Right.
So with that, I want to move on. And in the middle of that conversation, we had some people join the meeting. So welcome Megan and Mike and Hannah Valento and Jen Johnson. Jen is
It's Jen Oaknick.
okay. I was thinking, I was like, did you change your name? Okay, thank you. All right, cool. So we just talked about the first comment that we got from Dan Fabian and kind of expanding on what those metrics will talk about. The other ones I wanted to point out, it was in the implementation section, but they're really talking about the goals. We just repeat our goals in the implementation section.
Okay.
And so one of them was, consider working into the chloride goal, this non-increasing trend. And so Meg and I talked through this, and it's kind of another one of those cases where, we've gone through all these workshops and we like how the goal is written, but maybe what we can do is in that section of the plan, when it's talking about how we're going to be implementing the goal through these various programs and projects, we can talk about establishing the chloride trends and notifying PCA in cases where we notice a statistically significant increasing. We already had established trends in there, but just saying, that's the check. If you see a statistically significant increase, that's when we are going to start kind of not raising the alarm, but reaching out.
Right.
Emily, what
I think-
page number is that?
This one, our chloride goal.
No, not in the plan, on the comments section.
Oh, it's the implementation plan for
Eight,
tab 4.
page 8. It's page 8.
Oh, thank you.
I think that's good. I think notifying action is the right thing to do, because we're not going to be able to do anything. Most of these are along roadsides anyway, so we have to get the state involved. So I think that's a good point.
And then these other three were again kind of tying the metrics to the goal a little bit more. And some of them we realized, like in the Greenway corridor, in the upland resources, we talk about this Greenway visiting, and then but the only metric we had was establish one park space. And so we'll add establish a Greenway corridor.
Which one are you looking at? The 4.6.15?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, here, let me just go to that section of the plan.
Oh, I think that's good.
So yeah, establish one Greenway corridor. And so, and you know what, I even just misspoke. Megan and I talked about it, and that was our original thought, was say metrics establish one Greenway corridor, but really that's going to be more than a decade long process to get one contiguous corridor. So the recommendation was actually, instead of establishing it, the corridor itself, establish partnerships with agencies, because it's going to be a multi-year effort for sure.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Okay. Yeah, and then the other ones were kind of just clarifying language a little bit more. I don't know, Megan, do you want to get into the details of kind of the stream and wetland metrics, or I think it was not any major changes.
No,
Well, they're more
I would,
defined, yeah.
yeah, and I think some of the elements we listed are things the district is really good about tracking in the progress reports, which are informative to make management decisions by the board. So we just clarified that, these are the things the district will be tracking, instead of thinking that that's our goals and metrics, because those are just more the counting the widgets, but those are useful to know what the district has done and where they're going in the future.
Yeah, I think that's always assumed, but it's really good to put it in writing so the public knows how we're tracking this stuff.
Okay.
I think it's good not to have a number either, because that's so hard to accomplish.
Especially especially in a
beginning.
10-year plan,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The only way to do that is to have the number of wetlands that used to be, how many there are now, and what percentage do we want to restore? Or do we need to restore for water quality purposes? Or flood attenuation, or any of those, factors that come into play, and then have a range, at 100%, 50%, 20%, that kind of thing that we're working toward every year. So I like this. I don't think that we're ready to do that kind of defined goal setting yet.
Okay. So that was really what I saw was the major comments on the goals and metrics. I wanted to quick touch on a couple of edits that staff is proposing that we kind of noticed just ourselves after going through it yet again and with the comments and everything. So one is, the topic of one of the tributaries to Bone Lake. So we've got the Meadowbrook tributary on the southeast, and then from the southwest, there's this wetland complex that flows, and it contributes a high amount of flow to Bone Lake. But Megan did some further review and found that there's really not a defined channel. And so previously, kind of as prior to the 60-day period, we met with the CAC and they recommended that we add that southwest tributary as its own priority resource, which entails establishing goals for it. If it's a stream, it's in-stream, concentrations. But really there isn't a definable stream channel. So it doesn't really make sense to set a goal for it and to have an implementation action for it. We'll still prioritize that area as it relates to Bone Lake, just to address those flows and make sure Bone Lake stays good water quality in the long term. But we just recommended, just removing it from being its own standalone water body that we have goals for.
Well, I think that's smart. I mean, it's not, if it's not holding water all the time and it's not a natural channel, then it's altered in some way. And so I don't see how we could treat it as a natural stream.
Right.
I think we're coming to the point where, especially in these heavily ditched and altered lake management districts like Comfort and Bone, Little Comfort is pretty ditched as well. We're going to have to come to terms with those either illegal or abandoned ditch systems and not treat them like they're still functioning properly.
Right.
So
Yeah, and I'll just
I
add-
agree the decision that you made.
That's good to hear. It was kind of a lapse of, when we were in the initial review process that was brought up, and we're like, yes, that's a good idea, because we had called it that southwest tributary, but it really is just a wetland complex that drains to Bone Lake. It's not even a ditched wetland in its core. So we wanted to make you aware of that, so it wasn't surprising, but it's just a oops on our part, and we'll go back to our initial definition. So thanks.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Okay. And I'm kind of just jumping around here, but just trying to focus on the big items that might come up. So one more just proposed staff edit was, we had kind of talked about this boundary review in the Bone Lake Management District profile. And it's been sort of on our radar, and especially as we're updating all the H&H models. But it didn't actually have its own home like called out in the watershed management plan. And so we just propose adding it to the technical resource, or now it's just interagency communication program, have a line item for boundary review, just so that's where we can file and code everything.
Okay. Sounds reasonable.
Okay. And then I think the final one was sort of this bigger topic of the Lake Association grant program. But before we get into that one, did managers have any other comments that kind of stood out to them as they were looking through the table or just reading through the agency review letters?
Did you resolve the title of the, Dan raised the question whether it should be 2022 to 2031, and you were going to talk to Dan about that. Did we get it resolved?
Yeah. what we're gonna do is still call it 2022 to 2031,
Okay,
and then have just effective, you know, what did I propose saying just effective and then the date of Bowser approval on that title page. So we might rework the title page a little bit. Jessica's gonna look into that, but just kind of right here, having the effective date. Because otherwise it's kind of a, you know, it's 2022 through or, you know, September 2021 through September 2031. And he
Right.
agreed. It just makes more sense to have the easy 10-year budgeting period here and then the technical effective date.
I have some general, not a lot, but I have some general comments that are mostly, I think, either highlights that should be brought out more or true corrections, like typos and things like that. So I'll wait until the end because it doesn't really deal with this matrix thing.
Okay. So
I guess one other comment I have, if you stand back and look at all these comments, it was pretty obvious to me that the city of Forest Lake had made a number of suggestions and ideas of things they wanted to be considered. And we've kind of been through this cycle before when we've had these separate meetings with the city. And it seemed to me that we should take this as an opportunity to pull out what they wanted, some of their thoughts. And then of course, there's some things that we'd like to have them change also, right? And combine those thoughts together in a proposal back to the city, not as part of this plan. I know that in our deal, I think it was Wyoming that made a comment about those floating bogs in the in Sunrise River, and we responded to that with a very specific plan addition. We haven't responded to any of this, saying that we agree or we accept that concept, but there's so much there, and we have this ongoing challenge of trying to work more closely with the city. I think we should take all those ideas and put them together and put together a proposed trade-off plan, so to speak. You know, you want this, we want this. So if you do this, we'll do that. And we come up with something that moves both of us forward in terms of getting things done and having better communications, et cetera. So I was suggesting that the board might want to consider doing that offline as a separate project because of the importance of Forest Lake.
Well, I think that sounds like a good idea and do that for each one of our communities, whether it's as extensive as Forest Lakes or not. It shows partnership and that we're listening to their concerns. And I agree. I don't think it has to be part of the plan unless there's something in their comments that isn't covered in the plan, and we have to include it. But if it's covered in some way, then we can make it a little bit more extensive and personal by addressing each community. I like that idea.
Well, like, for example, they wanted to share permitting responsibilities and so forth. In other words, really what they want us to do is take over more of the permitting. Okay, we can do that, but then in turn, we'd like them to maybe to have a stronger reinforcement program on the tree issue along the shoreline, you know, for example. And both of those things will help each other in terms of getting things done that we both want done. So,
Right.
Well, and that's what it leads to, though, is it leads to looking at their ordinances and ours
Right.
too, our rules.
right.
And where do we need to make enhancements in both? So, yeah.
And if we put together a type plan suggestions, then we've got a document that can be negotiated from and work back and forth and can show progress on how we address those issues that have been brought up. So,
Yeah, accountability. It's the start of accountability. I like that.
Yeah, and I'm with Jackie. I don't, unless it specifically changes the content of the plan, it's something that we need to do offline. It's not something that we need to do today or
Oh, I agree.
in the 90-day period. We just need to get this plan moving. But if there is something that does affect the plan, then we should respond to it. But yeah, and I'm with Jackie on the idea of talking to all of our communities as well. I mean, they should all get the same basic opportunity to ask us for help in areas that they think we can help in, and we can push back and ask them for help in areas that we think they can help us in. So it seems like a good thing to do, and just once we get started with the plan, is to just sit down and sketch that out and start heading in that direction.
And maybe we capture this as a follow-up action item, you know, because we're going to be busy with the plan here for the next 4 months, 5 months yet. So it could
Right.
very easily get lost again.
Sure.
And I'll make a note on my follow-up plan here also, but and maybe you begin to put some thoughts together in terms of some of the trade-offs we might want to make based upon our past dialogues we've had with the city.
Yep.
Yeah, and you know, I think just keeping that in context, that's the foundation of any good business partnership.
Yeah.
Is that type of partnership and communication. And I know we used to meet with all of our customers on a quarterly basis, and we had an annual plan for each of our major customers in business environments. And it was a very good process to keep track of making sure that they had all the latest information on services and products and so on, but also where we could be improving to make sure that partnership stays solid. So it's the same principle that we could apply here, you know, with all of our communities. I think that would help enrich that partnership, you know, that we're really just in the last couple of years have started to make, I think, better track on because we have more people now that we've got people that can be devoted to developing those relationships. So I do like that. I do like this concept.
And I'll just note that what I would recommend is, as far as our 10-year plan is concerned, I think that we've got these points covered kind of at that high level.
Mhm.
And so I agree with what you're saying about, okay, then the next step, it's kind of like having your 10-year plan and then you write your annual budget and work plan. More of an offline thing of, all right, here's the detail fleshing out how we're going to do this, get it in writing. So that sounds good. I've got that noted.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more than that too. I think like we're talking about, it's a way to enhance our partnerships with our communities. And we have the basics covered. Our 10-year plan just has to have that basic concept in place. And we develop the iterations of that partnership or that whatever that program is as we move along. So it's just that it's an enhancement.
The only other item I had was on page 5 of the matrix. It was actually 2.4.1 tributary and diagnostic monitoring. And Dan had raised the question of the fact that we had for Bixby Park, we had 2 numbers. One was 206 pounds and one was 93 pounds. And the issue was, one was the phosphorus reduction at the project site, 206, and the 93 was the impact on Comfort Lake downstream, right? Where it had been filtered out from the, you know, shallow pond, et cetera. But that brings up an interesting issue. We're always going to have those 2 numbers on every project we do. So how do we want to handle that? Or do we just want to ignore it and only take the one? I mean, if you take the 93, you do yourself a disservice because the project itself actually did 206 pounds. And so maybe we need to come up with a policy here. Maybe we've got an unwritten policy, but maybe we mention both in most cases so we don't lose track of either, the importance of either. So I just thought that was another issue that hit me when I was reading that, is saying, hey, how are we gonna do this in the future, and how are we gonna be more consistent on that whole concept? And Megan, maybe you've got some thoughts on that too.
Excuse me, sorry. Manager Schmaltz, that's a good point to raise, and Emily and I went back and forth on this. It's of most significance in the Comfort Lake Management District area, since one, there's the large distance between practices. It routes through shallow pond, which we know has a pretty significant impact in terms of reductions. So, you know, we could definitely incorporate and try to do it in a succinct manner so we don't get too much text. But, you know, I guess I would support including both. We do try to keep track of that in the lake Emily, what's the spreadsheet we call that we put it in the progress? The lake metrics tables where we track the projects. In that one in particular, we note that reduction associated through shallow pond. And so, you know, we could simply say 206 pounds per year at project and 93 at the resource, or, you know, Comfort Lake.
But don't we deal with this in everything that we do? I mean, I remember
We
discussing this
do.
with Mike, with the Bone Lake subwatershed assessment. You know, you've got your edge of field numbers, which is what SWCDs typically provide, but
Right.
not the, you know, not the damage that's caused at the resource, you know, at the lake that it dumps into. So there's always that factor. It's a distance factor, and it's also a resource factor. What lies between the source of the pollution and the lake? You know, is it a filtering process that happens between those 2 points, or is it a straight pathway of pollution from one to the other? So, you know, there's all kinds of different factors. So I think these two numbers are important. I don't know that we need to present them in any different way that we've been doing it. If it's not clear though, for some readers, then maybe just saying, you know, at the resource, the number is 93.
Mr. President, managers, on that topic, I guess presently, when we look at our PTM structure, priority is lakes. So by and large, we have leaned toward using the number of what the impact is to the water body of concern. So whether it's Bone Lake or Moody Lake or any of the other ones. So it's I think just in general, just what Manager Anderson just stated as well is important, because what we now understand between Bixby Park and Comfort Lake, it's very important to know that, in fact, Shallow Pond is actually like a filter, but it's only going to, just like any kidney, it's only going to have so much filtering capacity. So we don't want it to be a large future source of phosphorus. So, you know, what's a natural attenuation for a wetland complex of that size? I'm sure there's some data out there, or we can help facilitate some more research on a topic like that. But
Yeah.
ultimately, the value there for the Bixby Park is twofold. One is that we've largely reestablished the wetland complex there that was within the park. We've treated a large amount that's coming out of that whole drainage area, and we're extending the life of Shallow Pond. So those are all really critical things. And then in addition, we're the top priority thing that we're after and was the reduction to Comfort Lake. So I think that's until our part on the PTM side, the priorities, until they change from being lakes, you know, then we would want to, I mean, if wetlands become an equivalent tier, so to speak, of prioritization, then we would want to rework those numbers, so to speak. But right now, we want to do this, and again, this is Manager Anderson, and the swap piece, we really have a lot of concern, because if you're only doing edge of field, you just have really no context at all into what the impact is for the water body downstream, or what the cost benefit is from any standpoint. I mean, it could be just a grass swale within a field that is treating it, but not necessarily a wetland complex or something else. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that could be going on. And in addition, you can actually sometimes be picking up things along the way and adding even more than what is at the edge of the project or the field. And that's where the benefit of doing effectiveness monitoring comes in. And overall, our overall monitoring work as a whole. So I think that we'll want to track both of them, yes, but I think what's impacting or getting us to the end point at the lake is going to be still the top number we want to track.
I agree with that. I think we need to mention both of them, because as you said, it makes a contribution to downstream also, in preserving the assets that are downstream besides Comfort Lake. And that's true with every project. Shields Lake is a good example, you know, direct benefit to Shields Lake, and then, you know, a smaller benefit to Forest Lake. So
I think
we can mention both those numbers. So
yeah, exactly. I think the importance of it also, in one other respect, is that our beginning goal was to return as much as possible to pre-development conditions, especially when it comes to the water bodies. And the only way to do that, I mean, this damage is all happening from man-made occurrences. And between, you know, just using the example that we're talking about, between Bixby Park and Shallow Pond, you know, there was none of that urban stormwater coming that direction. And the same thing true shallow pond down to Comfort. So I think that context is so important in understanding what our end goal really is that we're not going to stop progress, but we can make progress be responsible so that it's not damaging the downstream resources. And all of that information from the start point of the pollution down to the resource is very important in understanding that whole context. So for me anyway, I think that helps because it helps us, getting back to this partnership thing, it helps when we're working with our partners to say, okay, you're exporting X. Now, if you can reduce that by 50%, then we don't have as much work that we have to do downstream. And so you're starting at the point of that solution and trying to, a pollution source and trying to come up with solutions that attack, you know, where it should be happening, where the improvement should be happening. Anyway, I think we're all saying the same thing. I'm just giving it a little bit more partnership context. It's important.
And these are important historical numbers as well, because if all of a sudden we start to see Bixby Park getting away from us, it would be nice to look back and see what it was when we finished the project. And if we don't have that data captured somewhere, then we'll have to go dig it up. And this is nice that it's right here in front of us. So, but yeah. Okay, were there any other specific comments about the matrix or the responses that we had to someone's comments that we wanted to pass on to Emily or Megan here? I didn't have anything else. Looked good to me.
Not on the submittals, but I did spend more time on the introductory section. I do see some things that I think should be tweaked a little bit. So if I could, I'd like to comment on those.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And then maybe we'll get into the Lake Association grant program after that.
Okay. I wish I'd written down the page numbers, but I didn't. But in the beginning sections, we're talking about the importance of the district. So it's in that introductory area. We're talking about the sequencing that we do. We've just talked about the adaptive management philosophy and so on. Now we're talking more specifically about how we do things. And I think that we just need to change the wording in that one paragraph. I got it written on my form, the page number, so I'll get that to you. But we're identifying in this paragraph that we start with cost effectiveness. We've just explained, you know, our process in tracking pollution, and then we're talking about cost effectiveness with the Pareto rule. And it's talking first about cost effectiveness. That's the first thing that's mentioned. And in 2 paragraphs down, it's mentioning we go after the highest pollutant sources. And I think the first paragraph that's mentioned in should follow that same sequencing. Start with the highest pollutant sources in the shortest amount of time and are the most cost effective for our stakeholders.
Was it in section 1? Is it looking like this?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, here it is, the very last sentence on the left column. In this way, the district can target and implement the most cost-effective projects that result in the greatest pollution reductions. And then it goes on to the next paragraph. I just think we ought to start that with the highest pollutant sources in the shortest amount of time and are the most cost-effective. And then end it that way because it follows the next paragraph. And how that's being recorded. And then the next is a date. The date on statehood is mentioned as 1958 throughout this section, and it's also in the timeline, and it should be 1858. So there's about 6 different mentions of that in this section, and then also in that timeline that was done. So you'll want to make note of that. You'll want to check that very carefully. There it is, right there. First one.
That's a good catch.
Yep.
But check those first 2 sections and the timeline very carefully, because I counted about 5 or 6, and there might be more, okay? Okay, there's a paragraph now going back to that, that section you were just in. I think it was the intro. History of the district. No, not that. The paragraph that had, here we go, that's this one. The next, yeah, the adaptive management chart. There's a accomplishment paragraph, and I think it might be, it's either a page before or page after. Okay, I think we're talking about accomplishments that the district has done. And it's a good paragraph, but I think it's going to get overlooked by a lot of people. And I just wondered, as you're going through this one final time, if you could figure out a way to maybe bullet point some of those and highlight. There looks like there's some open space on some of these pages. If you could just highlight those accomplishments that the district has. And again, I'll highlight this and or pull out that page, Emily, and just send you a copy of the page.
Okay.
So it'll be easier. There's a paragraph that talks about the doing between 2010 and 2021. There it is, the top right. Collected a large amount of data. And then it's talking about the 2 significant reports, which were the 6 lake studies and so forth. You know, it doesn't mention any of the foundational reports from the beginning years. And so I didn't know what you were trying to accomplish. There was just talk about the most recent or really the foundational reports like the Wank report and the first broad district-wide report that gave us the, you know, overview of what's happening in all of the areas. So if we're going to mention it just because of timing, I mean, you know, most recent, that's fine. And then maybe just mention that because there were some really significant early reports that were a foundation for that first 10-year period.
Yeah, Manager Anderson, I'll just, yeah, the intent was to describe what was done in the last 10-year plan.
Okay.
But I think you're right. We can also include, you know, prior to that, there were many other foundational studies that, you know, informed that plan.
I think
something like
one
that.
of the things that I get asked about all the time is that, you know, what's taking so long, especially at the end of the watershed. And to explain to people that, you know, if you're going to do this right, you've got to create the scientific basis for decision making. And that takes a lot of time, especially when you're just starting up as a new entity. And so I think just reinforcing that it won't take long. I mean, just another paragraph, or not paragraph, another sentence, you know, or a add on to the existing sentence, just to give it context, is that in order to move quickly, like we have been doing this last 10 years on project implementation, you have to have that scientific database. So I look at these things as educational, not just documentary of, you know, what we're doing, but also educating people on what should be done and what process we've been taking. It takes a while. One other thing also, this is just a typo kind of a thing, but look for it throughout. When you're talking about the lake associations, Comfort Lake is really lakes because it's the association for both big and little. So make sure that you have an S on the end of lake whenever you see the Comfort Lakes Association, okay? And then on the land use map, one thing I noticed, and again, I spent time here because it's foundational to the whole document, but the land use map, particularly in the Comfort Lake Management District, needs some updating. When we're looking at land use, there's an awful lot of cropland and agricultural land still being shown in Comfort Lake. And the amount of farmland, I don't know how old these maps are that are being used, but if it's from a state database, I think we need to look a little closer at our local plans because there is not that much cropland left in the Comfort Lake Management District. There's only about 3 farms between Forest Lake and in Comfort Lake. And from Shallow Pond to Comfort Lake, there's only one left that's actually farming. The Liberty Ponds area over by Little Comfort is still being shown as cropland. And it's not. So just if we can work to update that before we publish this plan, that would be good.
So Megan, would it be possible, so I know that we're using kind of the NLCDS map. So this would kind of involve us making like a hybrid map of taking kind of that standard baseline and then going in and manually changing some
No.
sections?
There might be a more recent land cover data set. I think the issue is it might not extend past the metro area, but that's always changing. So I'll check in with my GIS staff and figure out a solution.
You might want to
But
check
that-
with Wyoming too, Megan, because they're in the process of finishing up the next 10-year plan for the city of Wyoming.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure their engineers have updated I haven't looked at their map, but I should.
Right, and I think that also gets to a point that perhaps the land use maps from the cities is more accurate than these
Mhm.
land cover maps that are statewide databases.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
it better reflects how the land is actually used and not just how a satellite perceives it.
right.
Yep,
Forest
which
Lake
we
would be
have-
another important one to
Mhm.
look at locally. And didn't Scandia just change or just implement their new 10-year plan?
Correct, and we have Forest Lake and Scandia's existing and future land
Okay.
cover maps
Okay.
digitally. So it's just
Okay.
reaching out to Wyoming.
Yeah.
I'll look into that. That's a good comment because it does, in a way, misrepresent a little bit.
Well, it's critical because the area, this is the area we're talking about with the biggest growth in the next 10-year period, from the state perspective even. So we need to get this right.
Okay, so then I think the last item that we really, kind of the last remaining big change to the plan is surrounding the Lake Association Grant Program. So there was talk of trying to amend our current plans. We can get it in place this summer, and then also getting it into this draft new plan. And so I had asked Dan Fabian just kind of what the process would look like for that, getting it into this new plan, because I know he's kind of sensitive about, you're doing additional edits to your plan after you put it out for 60 days. So this kind of reworked community grant program didn't go in front of the agencies during that 60-day period. And so I think what the process to get that program into the plan would be to treat it as one of the comments that we received during the 60 days. And we accepted some, like the City of Forest Lakes came in after the deadline. And so if it didn't come in during the 60 days, that's okay. But I think we just need to, one of the things Dad said was, okay, you can respond to it as one of your comments, but you're going to need to have, the program details posted on your website, have it in Appendix F. It's really going to need to be fleshed out in order for it to be put into this plan. And so I think we're still in the process of that. And then there's kind of the whole question of where it belongs, because our current community grant program and all of our other cost share programs are housed under non-point source pollution abatement. And so we're kind of expanding outside of that umbrella of non-point source pollution abatement when we talk about AIS treatments. That just doesn't really fit that category that we currently have. And so I'm just kind of curious to hear the board's kind of discussion of, all right, we're kind of late in the game on this plan. How are we going to reconcile this with what we currently have in the plan?
Well, non-point source pollution is certainly an element of the Lake Association grant program.
Mhm.
And it's certainly a part of the other programs that we have for agriculture and cities and communities. It's not just that, you know, it's a feature of that program. But we have city programs that aren't all about pollution control, you know, and enhancements. So I don't know that it doesn't fit there. I mean, I don't have as much angst about that as I'm hearing Dan express. And the conclusion of Chuck was that it sufficiently fit within the program area that it could be added without an amendment. And so if we, you know, we've got this period of space that we have to operate within before, you know, one plan ends and the next plan takes over, you know, the next 10-year plan takes over. So you're not in a dead zone where you can't operate, you can't do, you know, new things to the, or enhancements to your current plan. So I don't see a problem with that. Did Chuck weigh in on this? Have you talked to him about it?
No, not yet. We kind of just got that comment from Dan.
Okay. Well, I think we should continue to work on that Lake Association plan and get that implemented under our current 10-year plan, because that doesn't seem to be a problem. And if it's something to do with timing on this one, then I think we can work with Dan to figure out, you know, what we do. I just don't think that we need to stop moving forward because we're in this 6-month period before a new plan takes over.
Okay. So for our current plan, if we wanted to put it under as a factor of the commercial community grant, I think it would still take a couple of changes to the watershed, the draft plan. So we have more on the order of $10,000 budgeted for that line item over the next 10 years. So I think we're going to have to make that change to the 10-year budget, upping that to $75,000 per year. And then, yeah, I think we just got to work with Dan and make sure just that, because we don't really have any specific program guidelines for it yet in that attachment F. So, yeah, just figuring out what do we have to put in there and what level of detail is Bowser going to require for those program guidelines, application form, how the review committees are set up. I don't know.
Well, I'm already starting to work on an outline of that. So I wanted to talk to Mike today to see what staff he would assign to this. But I think we can get that kicked out, you know, within the next week to 10 days. I don't see that as a real problem.
Okay.
So I guess a question I would have is I'm looking at that section 3004D. Is there technically anything we really have to do in this new plan to change that section? It says there's a maximum grant of 15,000, or as designated annually by the board. So I guess yes, some of the details of how we do community grants could be changing, but it's still a community grant, technically. It happens to be focused specifically at the lake associations, but it's not outside the range of a community grant. So my vote would be not to go trying to rush this in and get this plan changed if we've already got a wrapper or a framework that we can fit within. If we have to amend the plan later, that's not a huge deal. This is probably a pretty minor amendment. And I don't know, unless we think it's really going to hold up, you know, granting these dollars, then I guess we should probably push to get something in. But the community grant language seems pretty generic. It doesn't specifically stop us from doing much as long as the money is going toward the community and to help with non-point source pollution. It is specifically under the non-point source pollution section. So if that's an issue, then maybe we'll have to address that differently later. But that's sort of what we're doing, right? Is non-point source pollution grants. So anyway.
Plus the fact that over the years, we actually would change the dollar amount from year to year too, depending upon what our focus and emphasis was for that 1 or 2 years. So that tells me that we can also change the amount of dollars we have in there without too much of a problem.
Right, it says, or as designated annually by the board. So it is up to the board to make that decision every year when the budget cycle rolls around. So,
Well, if you remember a few years ago, we're talking about the maximum limits on those grants right now because that's published. But we actually didn't budget for those. We were withdrawing out of the reserve fund as needed because it was unpredictable
right,
and we didn't want that money sitting on that budget line item.
right.
So, but this I think is going to be something, I think we're going to see activity the first couple of years, but I don't know about an ongoing regularity to it. I hope so. But if there isn't, then we'll do the same thing where we're pulling it, we're keeping it in reserve funds. You got to budget for it, but it's in reserve. And then we pull it out as we need it. I did communicate, like I said, at the board meeting that I was going to work with the staff to get this thing outlined and ready for implementation. And I hope to have those drafts to the board at the next meeting. But I did copy Chuck. I didn't include him on the first email with the outline of the program. And I did send it to him after the meeting, and he said that he didn't see any issues with this, that it fit within the framework that we have. So we're not looking at an amendment here.
Okay.
And I think we can get this done. The question is this new question from Dan about, putting it into a document that has already gone before the public. But I would think that the intent of the program, as it fits into our existing ones, isn't going to be that big of a deal. But we should reach out to him and find out what his feelings is. And if it's accepted as part of the comment section, then we're covered.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll talk with him some more. Just, and we might need to make some changes because it's, nonprofit. I'm not sure if all of our lake associations are nonprofit. And also I think the exclusivity of these dollars are only for lake associations. It seems kind of like a difference.
They are nonprofit, all of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, just potential projects. Again, just only are listed as non-point source projects, and we want to expand beyond that. So I think that's where he's coming from. And I think it makes sense. We don't, we want the plan to reflect where we're trying to put these dollars. So,
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want to mislead anyone, and we want people to have an opportunity in the next period, or Bowser for sure, to review that and to pass judgment on it, whether they think it's a good thing or not, right? I mean, that's what Dan's concerned about, is that they want an opportunity to see this last minute change. They don't want it to just slide through and then not have been reviewed. So we just got to give them an opportunity to take a look at it. So.
okay. So my next thing would be to go sort of through the next steps and revisit the timeline a little bit. Talk about where we're heading next. I'll get that pulled up. Okay, so we're proposing the public hearing on June 10th. And so at least 10 days before that, we need to publish responses to comments. That's Memorial Day. So I am aiming for that Thursday, May 27th, to put out responses to comments. And then to actually have the revised plan. So figure out if we need to revise any more language, have all the appendices with the cost share guidelines finalized no later than June 3rd. So it can go out in that board packet on June 10th. So we need to have all those final edits in at the very latest that date. And then it's going to kind of depend, if we get any additional comments at the public hearing, if people show up and want to add comments, then we might have to turn around and make some revisions. I don't anticipate that happening. And so theoretically, if we've got the final, and again, this is the final, once we publish it, once we send it to Bowser, it's locked in. They won't let us go back and, add some things that we might have missed or make changes. They want that to truly be the final. And so if on June 10th, we feel that we've got it, that the board could approve that, and then we can just send it straight to Bowser. If needed, if we need to reconvene like a special meeting a few days later, we could notice that meeting the following Friday. June 10th is Thursday. And then we could meet as early as June 15th to approve that plan if needed, and then get it to Bowser by mid-June. Is kind of what we're looking at, the proposed timeline there. How does that sound to the board?
I think that's fine. I mean, it's mechanical at this point. And, today you're getting all of our last inputs. And so what happens after this is really a function of the process. So if Bowser's got a curveball here and there, then we'll have to get together. Otherwise, I think this is probably it for major input.
Yeah, it looks like we have enough time built into this thing in case we have to do a zig or a zag. We've still got time yet to do it before the dates from it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing will just be getting those, like Dan said, we need the cost share program guidelines in that appendix. And so we'll want to get those at least somewhat fleshed out. And it sounds like that's on track. So I know that, and I can let Mike jump in as far as staff involved. I know that Garrett is our AIS person, and our Lake Association liaison. Jason is more of our cost share program person to date. He's been going out on the site visits and tracking applications and whatnot. So I'd see them being involved in the process. And then, I've been the one communicating with Dan. So just as it relates to the 10-year plan, I think I could be involved, but I'll let Mike chime in if he's got any other thoughts on staff contacts.
Okay.
Well, Aiden has offered also to help with the land piece. I don't really know. Nick Banks, our senior land management person, starts tomorrow. So I think the other thing that I would want to understand, both from a requirement from the legal side, Bowser, and then subsequently then later from the board, what would be the oversight of these public dollars? We don't want to be, we don't want to have anybody accuse the district of funding social events, for example, or something. What if they're going to be in for certain things? And I know it can be separate from maybe education events, but those are different. So what all would it include? And I think this is, again, like where is an appropriate place for it to be within the plan? Because then part is what's the intended purpose, and then that dictates like how much of the money is to be used in what area would dictate then who on staff would be the supporting or primary person for any of it. Because if it's strictly, if we're going to commit it to be all technical, non-point piece of work, not EIS, then that's different than things that get to be EIS related, which is then Garrett. So there's just a few things to work through here. First, this just with on the legal side and with Bowser, what's an appropriate framework? Where in the plan would it be? Are there any restrictions on these funds itself? So just up front, and then it's kind of like our work plan. What are the tasks then that we would look for to be accomplished, and then who would be assigned, or what either number of hours. It very well, it seems like it's going to be a couple different people assigned to the workload piece or help with the coordination part of it. So.
And I think that's a correct assessment. I mean, this is it's intended to be a broad grant program that covers many different areas. So the question is, who on staff is managing, or managing multiple functions that this could fall into? Is that Garrett? Is he, because he's the liaison with the Lake Association, or is his focus just AIS?
By default, he's largely focusing on AIS. He's supporting Blaine and the water quality pieces, but through the AIS, because it's principally it's the most interaction we have with lake associations, then he's been that person to, we just try to be consistent in having communications from staff come from Garrett. So,
well, can you and I talk about this offline so we don't have to take up time here? Because I think we can get this resolved and work it out.
Right. Well, I think part of it is just, what is Bowser going to say about, what, and then also what, I think we can work out these other details later, or they need to be worked out after we get answers from legal and Bowser, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, I mean, Chuck's comment already has been that he didn't see any problem with this fitting in with what we have. So why don't you and I talk about this offline, Mike, and we can get through some of this
Okay.
mire that we seem to be in. Okay.
Right.
Good.
Okay, so does the board see any need to have the watershed management plan on the May 27th agenda? Otherwise, I don't think it needs to be on there, and we'll just revisit June 10th.
I don't see, unless there's a discussion of this grant program
Yeah, true.
that we're
Get
talking
answers
about.
by then.
But that would be sort of focused on the outline and shape of the grant program. And then once that discussion is done, then we'll know what goes into the plan. So it wouldn't necessarily be a plan discussion. It would be this Lake Association grant program.
The mechanics,
Yeah.
the operating process and the application process.
Yep, absolutely.
And oversight, as Mike just said. I think we can have that all bullet pointed and outlined for the next meeting.
Well, and I'm looking at the plant grant program description in Appendix F, and honestly, you don't have to lock down every detail. You do have to, at least provide the shape of it. So, and it sounds like that's going to be relatively doable within a few days. And if Mike and Jackie and Chuck can get together, and if we have any questions, we can probably get Dan involved, and so hopefully we can knock it out pretty fast. And we don't have to outline the entire program here in Appendix F. We just have to shape it, and then the implementation will be in an operational document that we have somewhere that'll talk about the specific details. So
and the concept is not to have it be so tightly woven that you lock out opportunities that the lake associations come up with for accomplishing the goals.
Right.
Which is part of all of it, which is education and best management practices by shoreland owners. And it could involve also getting involved with more local government issues, when the stormwater pipe is coming in, for example, that's close to the lake. I mean, getting that activity going.
Right.
So that they're more involved with the process. Now, that wouldn't require so much grant monies, but technical support from the district probably.
Right. It seems like the application and project approval process is really where you're going to talk about those kind of things. And there is going to be some project oversight for all of these grants. So there's going to be a review process. So that's the important, I think, check step that Mike was concerned about, that we just need to make sure we're not throwing money at things that aren't appropriate, and we won't do that. I mean,
Exactly.
we haven't done that in the past, and we won't start now. So
Right, that's where, to me, if, even on the supporting document that you mentioned, I mean, like the plant grant program, for example, it's very simple. It's $500 on a reimbursement basis. So we meet with them, we help do like a general design, and give them a list of plants. They're responsible to get them in. And then after it's all done, then we go out, verify it, take the receipts, not something that somebody says, yeah, I dug up from my neighbors and I transplanted a few over here. And then we repay on those. I mean, so it's this public purpose piece that Chuck often reminds us. And then I'm just also just thinking of the accountant, the audit, all those pieces that we staff have to work through to make sure that we're keeping everybody, above board on all of it. So including the members, I'm sure nobody wants and the Lake Association wants to inadvertently have something. So, and the other piece too right now is for us to go out and start asking around, does somebody else have something like this?
Well, if you're going to be leaders, you have to be willing to do something that's different. And whether somebody else is doing this or not is, I think, irrelevant to the point that we've got active community members that are focused on what we're focused on, and that's clean, healthy lakes. And we I think should be looking at this as an opportunity to engage that already engaged public and to help them on this course to clean and usable and functional water. So I think when we look at it from that perspective, there's not as much of the cloud that comes into the conversation. And with any program, as John and Steve have mentioned, there's always oversight in all of our programs, but we're opening a door to extend outreach. That's really at the core of it, is we want to build good water stewards among our population, our citizens, and we want to encourage those that are already engaged in that process to do more. And we're not going to be able to do this shoreland restoration project without the help of the lake associations.
Yep.
So anyway, not to belabor this anymore, but I'll contact you, Mike, and we can set up a phone call and then get Chuck involved, and Dan probably. It probably is good that we maybe contact Dan and have a conversation with him and then get that all straightened out. Okay.
Sounds good. All right. Anything else today, Emily, that you needed from us?
No, nothing for me.
All right. Anybody else have any last minute comments they wanted to make?
I just think the team did a good job on putting this matrix together and responding and getting all this work done. So we didn't have to work through all this. So Megan and Emily and whoever else helped you guys did a great job. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Jackie? You have
I was just going to say, I will send those page numbers to Emily so that she doesn't have to search and peck for all those references I made. Okay.
Okay. All right. Yes. Thank you, Emily and Megan and other staff who were involved. This has been quite the journey we've been on. It looks like we're nearing the finish line. So thank you so much. All right. Then I think a motion to adjourn is in order.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. I will call the roll. Manager Anderson.
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz.
Aye.
Manager Oknick.
Aye.
Manager Spence. Aye. All right. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good
Thank
meeting.
you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.